Now, we're going to let the folks out across Canada hear this young man, so will you please welcome Dan Hill.
You almost certainly know some of Dan Hill's work, but you'd probably be surprised at how prolific a songwriter he's been. His lyrics, an emotional autobiography.
Whoa, wake up to the madness of the city. Say hello, it's a brand new day. You make me wanna be.
Dan Hill burst onto the Canadian music scene in the 1970s, releasing 2 critically acclaimed albums.
The best new male artist is Dan Hill!
And winning his first of 5 Juno Awards at just 21 years old.
That's the best reassurance of all, is just to feel that there are people out there listening and responding.
A year later, that response snowballed into an avalanche.
And the winner is Dan Hill, Sometimes When We Touch. All right.
When Hill released what would become one of the most popular Canadian songs ever.
I wanna hold you till I die.
Sometimes When We Touch made Dan Hill a global star. But it was so popular there ultimately was a backlash, forcing Hill to step away from the spotlight.
We all need times away from public scrutiny because it can just wear you out. And I think I'm more creative when I'm not in the limelight than I am when I'm, always in the papers.
Can we try?
Hill began a long career writing songs for others, including hits for George Benson and Britney Spears. And he won a Grammy for his work with Celine Dion.
I'm asking, what about black lives? What about black lives?
And now, after a long hiatus, Dan Hill is releasing a new, very personal album and is being inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame in a virtual ceremony tomorrow. I spoke with him from his home in Toronto. Dan, it's a real pleasure to get a chance to talk to you, and congratulations on your induction into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate you saying that.
I was in high school when Sometimes When We Touch came out, and a couple of years later, I was working at a radio station. So from that perspective, I know how enormous that song was in the late 70s. But what about from your perspective? How did it change your life?
Well, everybody I worked with, from my managers to my music lawyer, to my producers, we had no idea the impact that A, Sometimes When We Touch would have across the world, B, how my life would absolutely undergo a transformative change as a result of this. I was touring 300 days a year. When I wasn't performing, I would be flown, say, to England to perform Top of the Pops. That's the only way you can have a hit in Europe. One interesting thing is, unlike today, my record conquered one country at a time. So it was the biggest Canadian record of all time in Canada. Then 3 months later, it conquered America. Then 3 months later, it conquered Europe. Then 3 months later, it conquered Africa and Asia. So unlike today, when, say, The Weeknd releases a single and it's shot right across the world, it was very strange to see the song every 3 months take over another country.
It is a very dramatic lyric that you wrote, some might say filled with angst. What was the story behind it?
Well, I was 19. I happened to be madly in love with this woman who was 22. She wanted to go out with many, many different men at the time. So it just crushed my heart that she didn't want to just be with me. I thought the only way I could possibly get her to just be with me is to write one of the best songs of all time. That's what I wrote Sometimes When We Touch about. Exactly what I wrote about was what was happening with me and her. I did play her the song over the phone, and she just thinking that this would really nail it for me. And she said, Dan, for a 19-year-old, you're way too intense. So that was exactly how Sometimes When We Touch was written.
So that song was so big, maybe it was inevitable that there would be a backlash. And it's something that you talked about on the CBC program Take 30 back in 1983 to the host Nadine Berger. And I'm going to play that excerpt right now.
I think your song, Sometimes When We Touch, was one of the biggest hits of the 70s. But then you had a shift away from your recording career. As a writer, what caused that dissatisfaction with the singing aspect of your life?
Well, I think at a certain point, Sometimes When We Touch became an albatross. It seemed that no matter what kind of song I recorded, if it was a ballad, it always sounded like Sometimes When We Touch to the people in the outside world. And so I felt I needed a chance to get away from all this and to reassess what I was doing and what the public perceived me as doing, and to get away from music for a while.
So that song, by your own description, became a bit of an albatross around your neck. What was that stage of your career like?
Well, yes, this is common with a lot of performers that have a monumental hit. Very, very difficult to come back and continue with that same success. So what I did was I started writing songs for other artists, as well as Sometimes When We Touch being a huge hit for me personally. It meant every single writer, producer, and artist was suddenly interested in my songwriting. So I ended up writing with the biggest, most successful songwriter-producer of all time, Michael Masser, who went on to write and produce all the Whitney Houston hits. Well, Michael Masser and I wrote a song called In Your Eyes, and then George Benson recorded it, and he had a huge worldwide smash.
In your eyes, I can see my dreams, reflections in your eyes.
But Dan Hill wasn't done as a headliner.
Can we try just a little bit harder? Can we give just a little bit more?
In 1987, this duet with Vonda Shepard, Can't We Try, was a hit around the world. You know, just like Sometimes When We Touch reflects the 19-year-old, angst-ridden Dan Hill, Can't We Try sounds like more mature and someone dealing with problems in a relationship. Was it autobiographical at all, that song?
It was absolutely, totally autobiographical. Pretty well, Ian, all my songwriting is a very, very revealing and honest and authentic. I wrote the song in 1983. The second verse, after the first chorus, the second half of the second verse, I was still kind of complaining about my problems with the relationship with Bev, and she came into the piano room and said, no, this should be about what the woman feels, not what you feel. And then she inserted 4 lines, which was what she felt the woman would feel, and I love those lines so much, I put it into my song, and then she got a co-writer's credit.
It is a beautiful song, and it's been in my head for the last 2 weeks. So
thank you.
And now you've done a new album for the first time in more than a decade, and again, it's autobiographical to an extent. So we have Dan Hill, the teenager. We have Dan Hill in his, I guess, maybe late 20s, early 30s, dealing with relationship issues. And now we have Dan Hill dealing with the passing of his mother and a very powerful song there, 90 years. Tell me about that.
It's hard to talk about, actually. I don't think I can talk about it, sorry.
No, and I'm sorry for bringing it up.
I can tell you, I can answer a bit of that question if you'd like. I'm okay now.
Okay.
I had moved in with my mom 3 years ago in the house that I now live in, and I wrote that song about how I felt about my mom.
And I don't want to dwell on this because obviously it's raw, but maybe I can ask you more generally, what inspired you to do an album after all these years? Well,
to be honest, I just had gone through an incredible reawakening creatively and wrote about 6 songs last March. Then I said, maybe I should record this as an album, not thinking at all that anyone would be interested. I just thought that it would be good for me. So it was a kind of a very organic process. I just did it because I wanted to do it. I wasn't concerned about how people would respond, fans, media. I just did it because I wanted to do it, and by some miracle, it seems to be resonating more than anything I've released in 40 years.
And we could do an entire interview just about your dad, about his celebrated life, inducted into the Order of Canada because of his work in terms of human rights. But there's an interesting story. You wrote a book about my father's son, and you tell a story in there about being 15 years old and your dad saying to you, you would never become Bruce Cockburn.
That's correct.
Now you're about to go into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame right beside Bruce Cockburn. How does that feel?
Well, I love Bruce Cockburn, so I feel honored and privileged that I have been inducted into the Hall of Fame along with brilliant writers like Bruce Cockburn. I love Cockburn from the very first album he released, followed him, studied him almost. It was kind of like my university to study performers and songwriters that were more advanced than I was. So I learned an awful lot from Booth Colburn, particularly playing better guitar, because he's a brilliant guitar player.
Let's finish with this. What do you hope your legacy will be?
Well, I try not to think about that, actually. The way I am as a human being, as well as a creative artist, is I kind of break things down kind of one day at a time, so, I play piano, play guitar, sing every single day. I'm really, really happy right now where I am. I feel very blessed, enormous gratitude. I'm just really, really lucky to be able to do, basically, I'm a boring guy, Ian. I've been doing the same thing since I was 4. Never changed my job.
Yeah, except you've managed to connect with millions of people around the world. And in high school, playing your 45 in my parents' basement, I was one of those people and never imagined I'd get a chance to do this interview with you. Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, for your time. I really appreciate it.